everybody. Welcome everybody today, and welcome everybody who will be listening to this later. Anthropologist Anita Hanig has said that both birth and death are sacred transitions. And I suspect that all of you on this call believe that and have had the difficult conversations and feel the same way. But it's people like you who are changing the dynamic around the discussion of death and dying. And so I thank you for joining us, and I especially appreciate Psychedelics Today for allowing us to have this conversation. Today we will discuss how psychedelics can bring comfort to individuals faced with life-threatening illnesses from the perspective of a death doula, and that's Catherine, who by the way is calling in from New Zealand, and Christina, who is a psychedelics trained psychotherapist and cancer survivor, and she will talk a lot more about her background, as will Catherine as we go forward. And Monica is a Psychedelics Today colleague. And when Catherine, Christina, and I first started talking to Psychedelics Today about this panel, and Monica had joined us because she's their event manager, she shared her story, her very moving story about the death of her father and how psychedelics helped her. And we said, you got to be a part of the panel. So Monica, so glad to have you here. I want to say that Catherine needs to leave early. She's actually on vacation in New Zealand. So we're going to try and fold her comments in as much as we can before she has to leave. Before we do jump in, I'd like to briefly mention the research around psilocybin primarily, one trial in MDMA, but psilocybin was in the forefront, or was the psychedelic used most in research. And what researchers found from UCLA, NYU, and Johns Hopkins, very similar results, where upwards of 80% of participants, even after a 6-month period of time, had significantly reduced their anxiety and depression, and 80% or more felt increased well-being. The NYU study, in fact, after an 8-month period of time, found that fully 58% of the participants had their depression in remission, and 83% of the participants had their anxiety in remission. So truly, these are some of the best results that psilocybin trials have seen, bar none. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about why we think that is. So logistically, we have 90 minutes together. And the first hour will be a panel discussion, and then we'll open it up for Q&A after the for the last 30 minutes. Please, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A, because it's much easier for us than to read those questions out as opposed to culling through what may be a lengthy set of chat comments. I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves and tell them what kind of brought them to this confluence of death, dying, and psychedelics. I'll just say for myself, I have worked as a marketing executive and owned a home health agency for several years. So that's when I really began to care for and care about older adults, which I now am one. But I immersed myself in the study of psychedelics for more than 2 years, and I'm enrolled, shout out to Psychedelics Today. I'm enrolled in their Vital Psychedelic Training Program, a year-long program, very comprehensive, very great. I'm also enrolled in Dr. Rosalind Watts' ACER Integration Program, also an excellent program to teach us about integration. Okay, and as I mentioned before, Catherine, Christina, and I work for Diaspora Psychedelic Society. It is a psilocybin retreat in Jamaica, and I am their manager for end-of-life programs. So let me turn it over. Catherine, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Durkin Robinson. I am a University of Vermont trained death doula. I am a longtime volunteer for hospice, 2 different hospice groups when we lived in Florida, and went through extensive training with them. And after a 30-year career as a political organizer, I wanted to continue to advocate for people, continue to support people, and continue to help people, but outside of politics. So I went back to school, went to the University of Vermont, and really just felt called to this particular sacred time in people's lives, and learned so much from that program. Then I also joined the National End of Life Doula Alliance. And while I was studying, and while I was, starting my private practice in Tampa, I reflected back on some of the things that helped form my ideas about death. It reduced my fears, and psychedelics played a part in that. And hopeful about all the different studies that have gone through, I began to offer trip sitting as part of my collection of services. Every doula is different, and so I wanted to be able to provide that. So I used some of my own personal experiences to inform that, and then also started learning more about the programs like the one offered by Diaspora Psychedelic Society. And so that's how I got involved in the psychedelic part of this, as a way that, knowing from my personal experience, that it helped reduce my fears and anxiety over death, and then wanting to pay that forward and help others as well.
Great.
Hi there. Welcome, everyone. We can't see you, but we know you're out there. So it's exciting to be here. My name is Christina Ingenito, and this is a really exciting topic in the field right now. So I'm pleased to be a part of this webinar today. I am a licensed clinical social worker, have been since 1986. I worked in the hospice field for 30 years. I've been a psychotherapist for 35 years, and I've been on my own personal path of exploration of non-ordinary states of consciousness with many different tools, primarily psychedelics, for over 40 years. I never imagined that all these different parts of myself would one day coalesce, and I would be able to be that integrated person. So it's a dream come true that I didn't know that I had. I am a graduate of the Certificate in Psychedelic Therapy and Research program through the California Institute of Integral Studies. I'm a MAPS trained MDMA assisted psychotherapist. I'm certified in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and I was a founding partner of the first ketamine-assisted psychotherapy clinic in Sonoma County, California. I'm also the clinical director and lead clinician at the Diaspora Psychedelic Society in Jamaica. And I certainly have personal experiences, like we all do, for those of us called to work with psychedelics, and also those of us who are called to work in the field of death and dying. A very important experience in my early life that shaped me was that my father very suddenly and unexpectedly died when I was 11 years old. And more recently, when I faced my own cancer diagnosis, went into a really deep despair around that, and then had the extraordinary good fortune to take part in an MDMA clinical trial for people with anxiety disorders related to life-threatening illnesses, and found that experience completely restored me to my prior level of functioning. I'll talk more about that later. You can ask questions of me about that later. So many different life experiences have all converged to bring me to this moment in time where I get to bring all of what I feel my gifts are to the world and be a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist with people at the end of life and at other times as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you, Chris, for inviting me to come up here and share my story. It's really nice to be here on this panel. It's my first time speaking on a panel, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I hope that we'll be able to get the message across. But hey, everyone, I'm Monica Miller. As Chris said earlier, I am the event manager for Psychedelics Today. So if you haven't heard yet, Convergence, our first in-person event that's coming up in March 30th to April 2nd. I'm helping to organize that in addition to all of the webinars that have been going on within the past few months here on Psychedelics Today. So it's nice to show my face here and speak up a little. But my history, my background comes from the gaming world. I used to work in gaming and esports. So I built casual and competitive programs for students in college to come together in community and to play games together, and also to do it competitively for scholarship and awards. And psychedelics kind of came in that moment in my life. And I had some personal experiences that really shaped who I was becoming as an adult, and wanted to share a little bit more about that with others and help others, through this pathway, which is a little bit new to me, but yeah, so just super happy to be here and share some of my experiences. So I'm going to pass it back over to Chris.
Thank you all. All right, Catherine, let's start with you, because I'm sure many of the people understand what an end-of-life doula does, but many more may not. So if you could explain that role and maybe a little bit more, you referred to this, but maybe a little bit more about how you think psychedelics can help people specifically at end of life.
Sure. So every death doula is different. I can tell you that from my perspective, I think I am called to do two different kinds of things. One is when somebody gets a diagnosis that is terminal or maybe even just very serious, and they're told to get their affairs in order. For example, a lot of times they'll call me. And so we talk about what their goals are, what they understand their condition to be, and how they want to live the rest of their lives. So we talk, we make sure that for so many of us, these conversations are not part of our everyday lives. We're not encouraged as a society to talk about dying. And so there are a lot of fears surrounding the end of life. So people want to know, what does dying look like? What am I going to feel? How am I going to handle all of this? What do I need to do? What does it even mean to put our affairs in order? So we talk about putting a care team together, and we talk about whether it's emotional suffering, spiritual suffering, or physical suffering, how there are people in place, groups in place, communities in place that can help relieve that suffering, that can help reduce that suffering sometimes. So we talk about that, and I am their companion through the end of life process. I'm not a guide. I don't come in and fix anything. There's nothing to fix. I am simply there to support, to help walk somebody home. And so that's one part of my job. The other part of my job is as a community educator. So I'm a former educator at the high school and the college level. And so I bring that experience with me, and I get called upon by community organizations to come and start normalizing this conversation. That can reduce fear and anxiety, talking about it, sharing experiences, sharing the knowledge that we do have about end of life. All of that can help people feel so much better. And then also helping people talk about other ways that they can reduce fears through psychedelics, through meditation, through open and honest communication with loved ones. And so a lot of people are interested because of the studies you mentioned. And they're filled with a lot of hope that maybe psychedelics, especially for people that are looking at a terminal illness, they feel like they're running out of time. And they want to end their lives with some joy, with peace. And they're hopeful that psychedelics can help them get closer to that goal. And so we talk about that. And a lot of times they're working with therapists who can help them determine the best path for them. And I sit with them. Again, not a guide. I am there to support and make sure that they feel safe so that they can dive deep inside. And it's like witnessing a miracle. So many of us that are involved in this understand that people are making peace with their childhood, with their past, with their fears, and being able to reach out and tell the people that they need to tell, I love you, or I'm sorry, or goodbye. And so those are the things that I help support. And sometimes I talk to people who are at end of life, and sometimes people are much younger. They're years away from a diagnosis, but they want to have a different relationship with death. They want to care for aging parents. They want to reduce their own fears now, not only so that they can have a better death in the future, but they can live a life free from that anxiety and have a better life right now. So I meet people at all stages. And again, just trying to normalize the dying conversation so that people can reduce their fears, and then also help people at end of life so they can live the rest of their days the way they want and die a good death, whatever that may be for them.
Excellent. I mean, I'm in awe of anybody like yourself and Christina in the hospice environment that works with people as they transition. I want to ask you though, before we move on, as an end-of-life doula, how important is it to involve the family members?
So I use the term family broadly. It's important to have loved ones. It's important to have a care team, is what we call them. And so this can be the medical staff, the medical team. A lot of times hospice is called in. This can also be children, grandchildren. It can be loved ones. It can be neighbors. It can be members of community organizations that come together and support this person. So I would say that it is important to have a care team, and that can be whatever you determine it to be. And a lot of times that means it's friends and neighbors, and a lot of times it can be family members as well. But it's good to have support. And a lot of people get at end of life and they feel alone. And part of my job is to help people understand the community around them that's available. Good, ethical, wonderful people. Nobody has to go through this alone. And that's the only thing I can really promise my clients is that they won't be alone through this. So yes, a care team and loved ones, very important so that they can have the kind of death that they want.
Great, thank you. Christina, as a hospice social worker for 30 years, you've seen thousands of people transition. How do you feel hospice prepares people for their death and dying? And would you consider psychedelics an option for them, or maybe more broadly in palliative care?
Thank you. And I just want to speak to Catherine for a moment. That was just a beautiful synopsis of the really important work that you're doing. So that was great. Thank you. Yeah. And, you know, Chris, you asked me a little bit about the history of hospice before we came on, and I'm happy to speak to that because I do think it's an important part of understanding where hospice might fit into all this. So hospice care was founded initially in the UK by Cicely Saunders in 1967. And the first hospice in the United States was opened in Connecticut in 1974. The early years of hospice were a completely volunteer effort in providing services. And it wasn't until 1985 that Medicare came along, got involved in covering hospice. And then not long after that, the for-profit world got involved. So the hospice and palliative care movement have been all about providing pain reduction in chronic illness in the palliative care part and comprehensive interdisciplinary comfort care at the end of life. The focus is on quality of life over extension of life, and it's all about physical comfort, pain management, emotional and spiritual support for patients and their loved ones, and prioritizing what uniquely matters to each person as they face their own mortality and death. In the US, and I know we're talking to people across the world right now, but in our country here, currently 50% of people who die do so under hospice care. Unfortunately, though, more than half of them don't utilize hospice services until 30 days or less before they die. So that means that they're often coming on to service at a time of great need or a crisis in addressing pain and physical symptom management. And sometimes that means that the needs around emotional and spiritual support are often not able to be prioritized. So the feelings of anxiety and depression and existential angst often become medicalized at that time and treated pharmacologically with antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications, and often without great success. The other thing that's happening, as I mentioned earlier, is that the for-profit world has really gotten very involved with hospice, which means that the entire interdisciplinary care is not prioritized as much as it was in the early days in the nonprofit world. So people are getting less of the psychosocial emotional support. For me, that's where death doulas really come in all the ways that Catherine just described. And in terms of using psychedelics in hospice care, that is not currently available because these medicines are not yet scheduled in a way that they're accessible, except some agencies are beginning the use of ketamine. And some agencies are helping clients to work through the right to try laws so that they can have access, particularly to psilocybin. So while I think there is certainly a place at end of life for psychedelics, I think that through the hospice path could be quite complex and problematic. Excuse me. I see hospice teams and clinics and centers perhaps referring once these medicines are rescheduled. And we're on the path for that to happen. I mean, it looks like within 5 years, MDMA and psilocybin will be rescheduled. We'll hopefully see, as Rick Doblin likes to say, we'll see psychedelic clinics on every corner with a full menu of an array of services available. And so people can be referred there, or psychedelic assisted psychotherapists can actually go to people's homes who are not able to get to a clinic because they're at the end of life and can provide care in people's homes.
Excellent, thank you. I like that you mentioned comfort measures for chronic pain, because we know that there is a clear linkage between chronic pain, depression, and hastened death or shortened life expectancy. So I'm hoping we have time later on to come back to that, especially in the work that ketamine therapy can offer in that regard. All right, Monica. Most people don't think about their own mortality until forced, and yet you were forced at a much younger age because of your father's death. Catherine said, rightly so, that part of what she does in the community is educate people as far as looking at overcoming their fear of death at a much younger age. So what would you tell people, or what do you feel the role of this in psychedelics for helping younger people overcome that fear of dying now?
Yeah, it's definitely a great question. And just some context on the story behind my father. He passed suddenly in April 2016 after an onset of a rare disease that came on in November 2015. So I had about 5 months from illness till death. I'm an only child, and I lost him at 20 when I was halfway through college. So half of my creator passed away and stopped existing. And I was like, whoa. Life is really short. He was 58 years old, and he got to enjoy a very small sliver of his retirement. And he worked so hard his whole life to have this very small moment of freedom. And I was like, that is not happening to me. I cannot let that happen to me. I have to keep pushing forward. My dad had a conversation with me on his deathbed, actually, as I was 20, halfway through college. Don't quit school because of me. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm grieving, I'm mourning, I'm having a hard time with this. He's like, don't quit school. So I stayed in school. I finished, I pushed through by any means necessary. And within those first 2 years, I just kind of kept my head down, went to talk therapy weekly, tried a grief group. Talk therapy wasn't super helpful. I had someone there to listen to me and validate my experience, but there was no like homework to bring back to the real world. Nothing that they were offering me that I could do in my own time. It was just like kind of a venting session. And, you know, it's okay to feel that way, which was great, but I needed a little bit more. So I started coping by taking some risks. I went skydiving. I started traveling solo and spreading my dad's ashes throughout the world. And then I hit 21 and it became legal to start drinking. So I started drinking pretty regularly. drinking almost every night, every weekend, barely eating or overeating junk foods, started gaining weight, was starting to really turn into that, like, I'm inspired. I started out being inspired. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to do what I want to. And then kind of like that crash came down, like the realization, okay, he's really gone. I don't know what to do. So I just turned to that substance, to turn to alcohol, and it was not doing me any favors. So lo and behold, at my heaviest of 220 pounds, the universe intervened by introducing me to a teacher who offered me both health resources, books, and education to get my life back on track physically, but also offered me psychedelics. It was kind of like the Matrix real life blue pill, red pill moment. So it was just like, you can let the grief consume you and kill yourself with food and alcohol, or you can jump into the unknown and experience something risky, something different. I come from a law enforcement background. So there was a lot of programming to defeat to try these substances for the first time. I didn't try marijuana until I was 18 and out in college. And I didn't try psychedelics until I was 22 by mushroom tea. So this teacher provided me mushroom tea. And after that, I was like, that wasn't so bad. I would like to keep trying. So I tried a few more experiences, and both in great settings and both in not great settings. And in the great settings, I got a lot of downloads and even got to like connect with my father on the other side, which was really interesting, but we can go into that a little bit later. But with these psychedelics, I started having these like aha moments of, oh, he's not gone. He's just physically not here. And that's what's going to happen to me. I don't need to be afraid of this. Like, that love lives on, this energy remains. And I was just having these amazing realizations and all of these aha moments. I had lost my connection with the divine throughout my life because I was brought up Catholic, and I didn't quite believe in those beliefs. I started rejecting them at a young age. So I was disconnected from that for a while. And then these psychedelics got me back to realizing maybe there is a higher power. Maybe my dad is trying to communicate to me. I started picking up some books and reading and educating myself on all of these different aspects of Buddhism, Taoism, all these different the Tibetan Book of the Dead, all these different resources just kept popping up into my life. And it was like the universe sent me to Death 101 course. And I got to learn a lot through not only the psychedelics, but the work that was done after the psychedelics. So the psychedelics prompted the thought, prompted the belief, prompted the experience, and then the books and the literature that existed out there helped me kind of pull that in. But Chris, to get back to your question about the young people coming to terms with their death, being faced with this kind of forced me to just be like, this is going to happen to you someday. And I know you're young right now, and I know you just experienced this for someone who was a little bit older, but this could happen to you at any time. Do you want to, not to compare it to my father, but live your life working, and not, being able to experience your life and then come to the end and be like, crap? Or do you want to, live every day like it's your last? So it kind of enabled me to take that choice. And every morning I kind of wake up, and some days maybe not so great, but some days I make the choice to just get after it. And so I hope that helps and answers, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you. We've talked about the fact that there's been several research studies using psilocybin for either cancer patients or patients with life-threatening illnesses. Christina, she referred to, participated in the one and only MDMA trial that was sponsored by MAPS. And so, yeah, I would love for you to share your story, Christina.
Hey, I'll briefly share my story a little bit about that experience. Late in 2015, within a period of 24 hours, I was both diagnosed with breast cancer, and my partnership suddenly and unexpectedly ended. I was swept into despair. I had not ever suffered from depression or anxiety prior to this experience, but I could say that no longer. Here I was, a hospice social worker for 25 years at that point. I thought that I really had done so much work in facing death and being with other people through their dying process. And the diagnosis really brought me down. And then I felt ashamed for not being nearly as resilient as I thought all of those decades of experience had prepared me for. So during the course of my cancer treatment, I learned about this FDA-approved, MAPS-sponsored phase 2 clinical trial for people who had developed anxiety disorders related to life-threatening illness. Since I had recently, and for the first time ever, spent a full day in the ER with what was later diagnosed as a panic attack, nothing that I even ever remotely had in my life before. Me, a panic attack? I mean, who was this person? Had fallen into a depression I had never known, and was so resigned that this is how my life was going to be. I qualified for the study, clearly. From the first moment of the very first medicine session, and there were 3 medicine sessions, but from that very first moment, I felt rejuvenated and restored to my former high level of functioning. But I also knew that it was not just the medicine. It was the context of the process and the relationship with the therapists who held me and witnessed me throughout a several-month process and over 40 hours of treatment and care like I had never been held and witnessed before. There were preparation sessions. We're going to be talking about preparation and integration later. There were several preparation sessions for each medicine session. I spent the night, I woke up, did an integration session, several more integration sessions, and then another medicine session, some more preparation, integration, that whole series of things happened. And by the end of my time in the study, or actually earlier in the study, but at one point in a medicine session, I looked up at the 2 therapists that I was working with, and I said, I want to do what you're doing. And within a year, I was. So that's a little bit of my experience of being in the study. And we can talk about the specific qualities of MDMA at some point if we want later on, but the results of that study, not only for me, but for the other participants who also took part in it, the results are published in the magazine Nature, really indicated that more research and clinical trials using MDMA at the end of life are really indicated. This was a small study, but clearly MDMA has a place at the end of life.
Yeah, let's talk about what you just referred to, because psilocybin is known to bring on a sense of unity, a sense of oneness with everybody. And that's in part what happens. People come to terms with their death and dying because they feel in union with all of nature, right? Okay, MDMA, because of the way its mechanism of action is different, and yet it was very, very helpful for you. And so, yeah, I'd like you to share what you think the distinctions are, especially for people at end of life, psilocybin, MDMA, and because of all your other work and training, ketamine, specifically to the end of life.
Yeah. So as you said, you spelled it out really well for psilocybin. Psilocybin connects us to the all. It reminds us that the thread of connection, that mycelial web that goes through everything, we are a part of that. There's no separation between us, the divine, everything. We are all one. People really have access to that. Many participants in the studies say that their experience of psilocybin at the end of life has been one of the most important spiritual experiences of their lives. High percentage of people in the study say that. MDMA works differently in that it quiets the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, helps people to have the prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning of the brain, come back online. And the other thing that it does in the process of softening and quieting that amygdala, people can get under that fear center and then can access a more heartful place within them. MDMA is actually not a psychedelic. It's not classified as a psychedelic. It's classified as an empathogen, meaning that it has this empathetic opening, this heart opening that extends to everyone. It releases and connects people with compassion for themselves, for loved ones that they may have some work to do in repairing and healing before they go, and for everyone and everything. There's no exceptions to that compassion. It's just a wide open heart space that happens for people. Ketamine is also different. Ketamine is classified as a dissociative anesthetic. In much lower doses, we found that it has psychedelic properties. And because of that dissociative nature of it, people have a little bit of extension away from the emotional material in their lives, so they can relate to the emotional material, but not be caught up in it. So they have a little bit of room to experience themselves, not so attached to their biographical data, to the stories that are attached to all of that, and have some room to connect again underneath that depression and anxiety. Ketamine is particularly helpful for people with anxiety. And also it has a unique feature that no other psychedelics that we know of have, that for people with suicidal ideation, it cuts it dramatically. So if people at the end of life are really feeling deep despair and want to end their life prematurely, even in the midst of facing dying, it can help to cut that suicidality so they can face what's happening with more peace and less anxiety. It also, because of its analgesic properties, can be a pain management benefit, and is that for many people. So, yeah.
Which gets back to the potential for breaking that linkage between chronic pain and depression and potentially hastening death. And there are many clinics, Dr. Michelle Weiner, for example, out of the Miami area, who specializes in this, and clearly has seen the results of that. But if we have time, I'd like to come back to that. But Catherine, you've shared before that, because hey, at age 50, you participated in ayahuasca. So what was it like for you? And a similar question, do you feel that would be a good journey for somebody at end of life to take?
So my experience was life altering. I decided for my 50th that I would participate in an ayahuasca retreat. And so I did. The very first night I took the medicine, again, it's nothing we don't already know, but to feel it with your whole being, that, like Christina said, we are all connected. Love is what lasts. Love is the most important thing. You get to, I got to experience the dissolution of my ego and recognize that it is not anything to fear, that it is, you are filled with joy, you are filled with awe, and you feel everything just on a visceral level, the connection, the love. So that first night was amazing and wonderful. We spent the next day integrating, so that we could take what we learned and apply it to the rest of our lives. And then that second night, I didn't feel a need to take the medicine again. So I guess that was my first experience as a trip sitter. This particular retreat had plenty of people around and available. A volunteer or a staff member, one for every 2 participants. So we really felt very safe, and able to kind of, like I said before, do a deep dive into whatever it is that we needed to learn. I was there with people who were veterans, people there who were trying to stay sober and were able to stay sober because of these experiences. People who were dealing with medicine-resistant depression. So that second night, when I was a volunteer and a trip sitter instead of a participant, I witnessed about 45 to 50 little miracles. People making peace with their childhood abusers, people making peace with themselves. It was just as powerful as experiencing it myself, watching others experience it. And come away from that, I was raised in an Irish Catholic background. I didn't have much fear of death. It was taught to me at a young age. It's very much a part of living. but to watch even that little bit of fear reduce, and to watch other people get to a place where they felt more peaceful, and just holding that space with them so that they felt safe enough to do this work. It was remarkable and life-changing. And so when people come to me, again, I'm listening. I'm listening to them and what they want. And so if they're working with a therapist and they determine that it's ayahuasca or psilocybin or ketamine or whatever it might be that will help them achieve a little bit more of this peace a little bit quicker than it otherwise would, I am there to support them in that journey, whatever it might be, with unconditional support.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing. But Christina, we talked before about, there are different health contraindications for these different substances. So looking at ayahuasca in particular, how do you feel about that for somebody at end of life?
I think it's a really case-by-case individual basis. Somebody would really need to consult with their care team, particularly the medical folks on that team. What medications are there? There's some medications that don't dance well with ayahuasca. So they would really need to make that decision in consultation with someone who knows about those interactions. The extraordinary advantage of psilocybin is there are no medical contraindications. You don't want to be using psilocybin if you're on lithium, but really that's pretty much it. There's no toxic dose of psilocybin. I mean, you couldn't ingest enough mushrooms in order to get to a toxic level. Ayahuasca can be pretty hard on the body. For many people, there can be lots of purging that goes on, and that's part of the cleansing and purification process that's inherent in ayahuasca. That's a signature piece of ayahuasca. Who knows what's happening in a person's body and what sort of illness they're living with and dealing with. So that's really a case-by-case situation.
Okay, great, thank you. So Monica, you said that it was the psilocybin tea, at least maybe that was the first instance of when you experienced psychedelics, but did you feel that sense of awe and unity with your journeys?
Yes, I have experienced that space that we have been discussing quite a few times. And with the first dose, I was very, very scared. So I did the very bare minimum of what I was able to do. It was very micro dose, very chill, just kind of playing video games and keeping my mind off of it. Because it was the first way in, but I started getting a little bit more confident about these sorts of drugs after I realized that, maybe what I was told about them isn't necessarily true. So I went down the line and then I tried LSD. That's where I've gotten most of my downloads from, particularly. It started at a music festival, was really euphoric. I felt connected, loved by everyone around me, got emotional thinking about my dad. And then I was like, I'm getting too much information to process here in this environment. I want to do this by myself at home where it's comfortable. So when I did it at home by myself and kind of just self-led trips, that's kind of where all that meat was. And I wanted to get a better setting to hear those messages clearer. And, that's kind of where Dad came in. Other family members, other people who were living were somehow calling me in my telepathic experience. So it was and then after that I did MDMA as well, and I had a few at-home sessions. All this stuff has been done underground. I haven't been fortunate enough to do a study or anything like that, so all of my experiences have been underground, low-key, but the MDMA stuff was also really, really powerful and helped me see a lot about past traumas and being able to bring those to light, what was stuck. I guess it's hard to translate this into words, but help me find what was stuck and focus on that outside of the experience, if that makes sense.
So was it during that LSD experience where you actually got to commune with your father?
Yeah, so at the apartment that I was in at the time, I happened to be back in my father's OG stomping grounds, so where he grew up, and I felt called to go to certain places, take walks in certain areas that he might have been before, and just kind of felt his presence with me that whole time. Like he was showing me, back in my day, I did XYZ down by the creek in my brain at the same time we were like walking. It was very, very interesting. But yes, at the LSD trips, I would say that was the drug, that was the experiences that like really made that connection. And it's like this feeling here in the core, in the center, that it's just that love, Catherine, I think it was that you were talking about, love is everything, love is that key. And that's what I had to realize. Dad is always here, dad is always with you, the love and the feeling, but physically, unfortunately not. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Mhm.
you. All right, so if you were paying attention to what Christina was telling us earlier, she emphasized the fact that it's not necessarily the psychedelic that does all the work for you, it's the work afterwards. So Christina, it may be helpful if you could explain what integration is for those that don't know it, and kind of then, you've talked about this already, but the importance of integration in this whole process.
Yeah, and I'll also add to that, Chris, because I can't help but add to that the preparation phase.
Yes, yes.
Because it's so important, particularly for people who have not stepped into realms of other dimensions. I mean, as Monica's speaking, she's talking about having access to realms that we can't see and feel here, entities that surround us that are always available to us, but not necessarily seen. That again, that mycelial web that connects everything, that's the largest living creature on the planet. Underneath, when trees are suffering, they send energy through the mycelial web that connects all of it. So that can be confusing and disorienting for people to just step into a psychedelic session where like, whoa, what is this? Where am I? I didn't even know any such thing kind of existed. So it's so important, the preparation phase of, you certainly, if you've been in the psychedelic world for any length of time, you've heard the phrase set and setting. This is such an important framework of building a container, focusing on the mindset that people have as they step in, focused on creating a safe container, a setting that is not only the physical setting, but it's the psycho-spiritual setting that people are going to be working within. Monica made reference to using medicines at festivals. And I think the use of these medicines in all kinds of settings can be really important. But if you're at a festival and you're dancing around and it's hot and you're dehydrated and maybe you're using other medicines and maybe some material comes up and it's difficult material and you look around and you can't find your friends, that's not a setting that's supporting you to really take that deep dive and be with whatever shows up. So preparation phase, getting to know the person that you're going to be working with, the facilitator of the experience, not your guide. The medicine is the guide. The facilitator is also following the wisdom and healing intelligence of that medicine. So asking questions, developing rapport, developing trust, getting a sense of the arc of what that experience is going to be like, what it's going to feel like when there's all these swirling experiences going on, and what the role of that facilitator will be, what you can count on them to be available for. So preparation is absolutely essential. Then there is the medicine session. We can talk about that a little bit, but Chris wants me to go back to integration. So if you want to go and have psychedelic experiences and not focus on integration, that's okay. You can do that. You're collecting interesting and potent experiences. But if you're really going in with the intention of having this be a healing, potentially transformative, potent experience, then it's so important to set those intentions during the preparation process. Let them go, let the medicine take you wherever the medicine's going to take you. And then in the integration process, which I happen to think is really the most important part of the whole treatment, is, okay, I had these amazing experiences or difficult experiences, painful, dark, joyous, very unusual images and symbology, archetypal elements came through. Well, what am I supposed to do with all that now? So that's where integration can be so helpful in making meaning of what a person experienced during the medicine session, and then taking that meaning making and applying it to one's life. How now am I going to live with all of what the medicine showed me? How am I going to take that and live differently? What kinds of practices am I going to utilize in my life to live differently? What am I going, are there things left unsaid to people in my life that it's really important that I learned to say, knowing that, wow, I'm really coming to the end of my life. My life is so precious. This time is so precious. How then am I going to live? So integration and the practices of integration are as unique as individual people are, but mindfulness, intention, focus, how to spend one's days, and how to connect with others and connect to the greater world in very specific ways on a day-to-day basis are the focus of the integration process.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So Catherine, yeah, as an end-of-life doula, then is there anything that you can add in terms of how you feel an end-of-life doula can help through this integration process?
Well, I think the best thing that we do is hold space and listen, really listen to what's happening. I don't like to say that we help. I like to say that we support. And as you know, a lot of my clients are experiencing this profound awakening at the end of life when they use psychedelics. And this work you can get to through meditation. You can get through other means as well if you have some more time. If they come to it through plant medicine, then again, like Christina said, what do we do with that? How do we apply it? And I find my clients, most of them, their worries, their concerns are around, again, I touched on it earlier, but it's true. It's around saying, I love you to the people that they need to say that to. I forgive you to the people that they need to say that to. I'm sorry. Making meaningful amends can reduce suffering immensely, and to say goodbye. So how can we do that? How best can I support them as they do that? And that's my job. And that's what I do.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, Monica, I like the fact that you said that for some of your LSD journeys, you derived more, I'll say benefit, but put it in your own words, from your self-led journeys. And I absolutely love the fact that Christina said, you know what, some people don't do integration and that's okay. So in your case, you doesn't sound like you had a psychotherapist working with you to do the integration. So what did you do to help yourself heal?
Yeah, I will say it was really challenging to do without a support network. I didn't know that spaces like this existed. I didn't know people like yourselves existed until I started working for Psychedelics Today. So I'm grateful to have found the community eventually. But in my time of need, I did have to turn to my own devices. And a lot of that came to education. So I was just called to watch some certain videos. A lot of like Alan Watts lectures came to be. So I was listening to a lot of Alan Watts and a lot of like Terence McKenna, just trying to understand the world around me. Journaling has been my BFF since I would say about 2018 is when I started, prior to my psychedelic journey, journaling like CBT to help with some depression, made some progress, and then just started keeping a daily journal because it was easy. It was, it was already routine. Also tried mood journaling for a little while to just keep track of where I was, what I was feeling. Reaching out to people here and there when I would need to, but definitely was something so intimate as death, kind of wanting to really turn inside and understand that and do the scary thing by myself. But So journaling, exercise, like getting that like physical somatic release outlet. And when I would go to shows or festivals, I find that to be like an extremely great release for jumping up and down, screaming. It's a place where you can do that without being called crazy. So being able to just kind of let all of that grief out. And actually at music festivals, I found tons of other kids, young adults who were going through the same exact thing and healing in the same exact way that I was. So I started attracting these people who also had parents who had passed over. And I just, we call it the DPS. It's kind of funny that your acronym is DPS as well, but the Dead Parent Squad. So we just kind of like make a little joke about it. And we text here and there about, how they're feeling around the holidays and just checking in here and there. But to be able to like meet that community while healing from that very specific thing, it's just very cosmic. So very grateful that I was able to found. Thanks for Karen, love GPS. That's awesome. But very grateful for how all these experiences have kind of led me to finding the community that I needed at the time. But top integration tactics, exercise, and journaling for me.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mhm.
So before we go to Q&A, we'd like to tell everyone about Diaspora Psychedelic Society a little bit, because really this psilocybin retreat in Jamaica, where psilocybin is legal, offers the very first of its kind set of programs. One is a psychedelic experiential training geared to end-of-life professionals, and a sacred transitions retreat geared to individuals with life-threatening illnesses, as well as their families. And third, we also offer a traditional end-of-life doula online program. But Diaspora was really the first to marry end-of-life doulas with psychedelic trained psychotherapists. So, Catherine, since you were the genesis of the programs, could you tell us just real briefly, because we'll transition into questions then, about the online doula training as well as the retreat?
Sure. So the online training is 2 days a week, Monday and Wednesday, and we go over a curriculum for people who are wanting to support those at end of life, wanting to, so we go over, all the kind of training that anybody who is involved, who wants to support those at end of life would need to go through, whether it's, common illnesses, pain relief, how to support people as they, as the body shuts down, understanding the phases of dying, and be able to answer those questions and provide support. And then also for those who want to integrate or use plant medicine in their practice, we go into ways to do that in the name of harm reduction, to be as safe as possible.
All right, thank you. Christina, can you explain what you do in the training, experiential training?
Yeah, so sometimes people will do the online part before the training. Sometimes people will come to Jamaica before the online training. So either way, the training in Jamaica is a week-long, talk about a deep dive, an experiential time for people who are interested in working with others to go through the entire experience. So go through a preparation process, go through 2 medicine sessions, and then go through an integration process, similar to what people who are in the retreat would be doing as well. So people who are being trained are going through all the different phases of what it's like to work with clients through that time. And I also want to say that working with psychedelics can be complex. There are many, many things that could arise. I'll say very briefly, difficult dark material can sometimes come up. So this is an introduction to working with these medicines. People who, I don't think people can come out of a 1-week training and think, oh, okay, I'm all good to go. I know all about psychedelics now. This is an introduction. It will help to have the experience of having their own meet and greet with the medicine. Oh, this is what it's like to sit with someone who's working with these medicines. But certainly more extensive training and skill building will be important if people want to add this to their repertoire of working with clients.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to shift gears to the Q&As now. And Rebecca, I see your hand is raised, but we've got a bunch of questions that came in before. Catherine, how are you on time?
I'm keeping my eye on the boat, and so far I'm doing well, and I'll stick with this.
All right, we don't want the boat to leave without you.
Right, no, I'm good. I'm going to be here for a little bit.
Okay, so some of these questions I'm going to go through fairly quickly, given the format and given the timing. So the first question here was, could you please share the research findings in a shareable format? All right, I don't have time today to pull it up and post it. What I would ask you to do is just Google Johns Hopkins Cancer Research, psilocybin cancer research, NYU. UCLA is a little bit older research, and you'll find tons of stuff that's really going to be helpful. The next question, what can you say about the overlap of psychedelic experiences and near-death experiences? Christina, I'll let you answer this, but before you do, I just want to say, yeah, there was one major study with more than 3,000 participants in a self-reported survey who basically said that 90% had common experiences.
Yep.
And so it was, enlightening from that standpoint. And Christina, what can you add to that?
Well, you said it, Chris. It was, and it just came out in August of 22. So that's a study that you can also look up. The results are very clear that people who have this near-death experience of, oh my God, I am connected to the all. This death is just an artificial separation of the realms, but really we have access to all of this. The similarities between the experiences was profound. So I actually, to answer the first question, I have a long list of links to psychedelics and the end of life, and I'll be happy to send that along to Monica, and then Monica may be able to technologically do something to share that. But I've made that connection. I mean, I've made that collection. So yeah.
Great, thank you. All right. This question comes up every time I've been on a webinar. What do you suggest that undergraduates that are pursuing a psychology degree do to enter the psychedelic assisted therapy field before finishing their bachelor's? Well, I'm going to answer this broadly speaking, because I don't care what age you are. When we come into studying psychedelics, like I said, I started over 2 years ago, and working my way up, going to conferences, listening to webinars, learning about the people that are in this space, reaching out to those people in this space. You'll be surprised at how many people respond to you. I happen to use LinkedIn very effectively. You write to somebody, you find somebody you want to connect to, you write something pretty compelling in that 300 characters you have on an ad note. And again, you'd be surprised. I would recommend you volunteer for harm reduction services. So that's another way that you can get involved. Just, start reaching out to professors. If you're intending on going to grad school, start researching and reaching out to professors now who are conducting research in the area that you're interested in. So that's what I would say. Anybody else got anything to add?
There are so many training programs that are available right now. It's incredible how many people are providing training. And really, it depends on the path that you're interested in. If you're a clinician, if you're a professional therapist, there are certain paths you can go down. And if you're a layperson that's interested in working with this, there's a beautiful program called the Fireside Project, and check them out. And there's many, many other programs for people who don't need to be professional clinicians, but are interested in somehow supporting people in this work. As Chris says, Google it. You'll be inundated with all the different opportunities that are available these days. Anybody else?
All right, the next question. Can you give more details on, it's Dr. Rosalind Watts, W-A-T-T-S, course on integration. Monica, did you want to answer that question? So it's kind of weird. What pops up is Monica wants to answer that question, but anyway.
Oh, sorry. I'm answering them through the thing here so they clear out of the queue.
Okay. So, but they're still showing up for me. So Rosalind Watts, did you spell her name? So people can see that? Rosalind Watts was a chief investigator and probably lead facilitator for the psilocybin clinical trials out of Imperial College in London. And she developed, first, she used a program, a protocol called ACE, Accept, Connect, and Embody, when they were going through the trials. And she has since extended that to ACER, Accept, Connect, Embody, and Restore. And it's a very much a nature-based program where we just started in November. So we are actually, the next cohort won't start until November of 2023, but look up ACER integration. I think it's .com or .org, and you can find out more about her. All right, this next one, I can only imagine how anxiety inducing it can be to be one to be facing end of life. And to some, the use of psychedelics might sound very scary to them. Are there some indicators or red flags that one should not go through this process? Excellent question. Christina, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think it's important that a person's mental health, psychological, psychiatric history is reviewed. And if whether they do it for themselves, whether they do it with loved ones, whether they do it with care providers, medical folks, therapists, I think that is important. There are, and the jury is still out with psilocybin, but there are certainly some psychological issues that you want to be careful in using psychedelics. So you want to consult with somebody who can help you to make that decision. Certainly there are people at the end of life who have suffered from serious psychological diagnoses, and we don't want to use psychedelic medicines and create a break that would make the process even more debilitating for someone. We certainly don't want to be doing that. So really a review of their psychiatric and psychological history is important. But for most people, these medicines can be so extraordinarily transformative.
Catherine or anybody else want to add to that? All right, we'll move on then. I haven't heard much mention of ketamine for end-of-life therapy. I thought this would be the most accessible and have the best safety record to introduce to the hospice community. I'm going to try to answer that in conjunction with part of the next question, which talks about ketamine as potentially having negative side effects. Yeah, we could take a whole nother 90 minutes to talk about ketamine because it is so, I'll say, complex in the sense of there's 4 routes of administration. There's 3 different ways you can go about the protocol for the therapies. So we're not going to get into that. And there's about 7 different of ways that you can take it. So anyway, yes, ketamine has been a lifesaver or a life changer for some individuals. One of my best friends, his wife suffered from debilitating depression after a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, didn't leave her apartment for like 3 years, has now on a routine basis, she did the loading doses of ketamine, which is 6 loading doses of infusions, and now goes about every month for a booster ketamine shot. This woman is now using the word joy. She takes each day as it comes, and she lives the best life she can. Like I said, we could have spent a whole lot of time talking about this. Now, the question about side effects, and Chrissy, I'm going to turn it over to you, but the question about side effects, yes, every single one of these psychedelics will and can cause side effects, ketamine being one of them. And I will just say, I'm an example of somebody who I just heard the other day called pump and dump. So I went to a ketamine clinic with a well-trained anesthesiologist. I got my ketamine infusion. I trotted off. I was fine because of my particular experience, but I have read so many stories where people come out more harmed because they haven't had the proper support. So I would always say, find somebody who can help you. If there's a ketamine clinic where they have ketamine trained psychotherapists, please, please, please use that. Christina, I'll turn it over to you.
I think that we do need to be really careful about who the ketamine providers are. There are some fine, excellent ketamine providers. And at the same time, ketamine clinics seem to be opening on every corner. So do your research. If it's less expensive, that doesn't mean that it's a better service. So really watch that. I think one of the challenges for ketamine at the end of life, depending on how close you are to the end of life, is the ketamine needs to happen over a period of time, often over several weeks. So with psilocybin, for example, that's not true. Many of the people who are using psilocybin at the end of life have had one psilocybin journey. So with ketamine, you need generally 6 is what Chris just said. Often people do 6. So you need to do that over a period, perhaps of 6 to 8 to 10 weeks, because you're doing preparation and integration in between the medicine sessions. So I think ketamine shows a lot of promise. Another thing I just want to squeeze in here, and it's partly an answer to this question, but it's partly an answer to all of these medicines. I think we have to be so cautious about the medicalization and the pharmacologizing of these medicines. These are ancient medicines that have been used by indigenous people, not ketamine particularly, but psychedelic medicines in general, have been used all around the world in ancient indigenous traditions. And it's not just about what the medicines are doing to a person, it's about the interactive relationship that happens between the person taking the medicine, their own inner wisdom and intelligence working in allyship with the inner wisdom and intelligence of the medicine. It's not like I have a headache, I take an ibuprofen, the headache goes away, all I needed to do was take the ibuprofen. That's not this. This is an interactive relationship. Person needs to be engaged in a process of healing. It's not that the medicine does something to you. It works with you in the transformative process.
I think then this next question brought up ketamine, but it also brought up MDMA as it can be a bit toxic. And then it goes on to say, for medically complex situations, what about exploring other substances such as cilomethoxin or 5-MeO-DMT? I don't know if any of you can speak to those two, but clearly, Christina, you can speak to the MDMA as being potentially toxic.
Well, I'm not quite sure about what a person means by toxic, but anybody who's taking part in any of the clinical trials will go through a full medical experience of making sure that they're eligible to work with MDMA. And the main thing we want to look at with MDMA is heart issues and blood pressure issues. So blood pressure will transiently raise during the MDMA experience, as will the heart rate. If your blood pressure and heart rate are low enough so that it can withstand the increase, then you're good to go. There are no other contraindications to MDMA besides that. However, if you're on SSRIs as well, the SSRIs will blunt the effects of the MDMA. So that will make you not able to work with that medicine. 5-MeO-DMT is certainly an important part of the psychedelic pharmacology that's available, and I think it's worth exploring as an end-of-life medicine. It connects one with the all the way nothing I've ever experienced before has done. So again, I certainly think it can be added to the repertoire of what could potentially be available to people at the end of life. But in terms of accessibility, I think that psilocybin and MDMA are on track to be rescheduled and therefore more accessible. People who are using those medicines now in most places of the world, except for places like Jamaica and Costa Rica, where you can get them more readily and they're legal, are going to have to access the underground community. And that can be challenging for some people to get in and find out who those providers are and to be able to access a reliable, trustworthy, skilled, and experienced person. And I encourage you, if you're accessing the underground, do it, go and find somebody, but be sure that you do your homework and really find somebody who's reliable and who knows how to work in this space.
Silomethoxin, anybody have experience with that? I mean, we know that there's the church in, what is it, Los Angeles area now? No, okay. Christina, are there any CAP therapists or programs who administer ketamine to hospice patients in their homes that you know of?
Yes, there are. I did it myself at a hospice that I worked with, that I was trying to introduce ketamine to, and they were slowly coming to the idea. And so I was able to do that only with one patient, but that's changing more and more, and more hospices are opening to the idea as the research is showing. This is worth our attention. This is worth paying attention to. The problem is that within the work that the hospice team is already doing, it can be challenging to add this in to their work that's already happening. A ketamine session is about a 3-hour session. So just some logistical, budgetary, financial issues need to be considered for hospice staff to be involved in doing that. I see it more as hospice consulting with ketamine assisted psychotherapists and other professionals to be working with those. You know, a hospice can refer to those providers rather than providing that directly themselves. But who knows what's coming in the future? You know, this field is expanding and moving at such a pace. I don't think that any of us sitting here or in this webinar can say, oh, this is where we're going to be in 5 years, because the explosion that's going on is happening at a pace that is spinning all of our heads.
Okay, Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer. She's my colleague in Psychedelics Today Vital program. Aya can be pretty grueling for those dealing with end-of-life conditions. Would love other perspectives on this. You know, somebody like Joe Tafur, who's got a lot of experience. Seems like one would want to evaluate this very carefully. I mean, pretty much, Christina, that is what you had offered earlier, right?
Yes, definitely be well evaluated, and also choose a ayahuasca provider very carefully. I have deep respect for the indigenous roots of that medicine and that tradition, and there's become a whole tourist industry around this. I think people need to be really cautious about this. And for me, with all due respect to the lineage of that medicine, I feel really strongly that that belongs to that culture and to that tradition. So the cultural appropriation of some of these medicines really needs to be addressed. And so again, choose wisely in all of these medicines and in all of the people who you may be working with.
All right, let me while I'm going through these, hey, Catherine, can you put the website for Diaspora Psychedelic Society.org in the chat?
Sure, absolutely.
One of the questions. All right, so what about SSRIs and psilocybin? I've heard there is a risk there. I'm also going to let Christina answer this, but I also want to say that I'd say there's been an evolution on that thinking. Clearly, we know that clinical trials always ruled out the use of SSRIs. They wanted a very well-defined group of participants that were going to show the best results from using psilocybin. So SSRIs were taken out. We know for a fact SSRIs blunt the effect of psilocybin. But there are people, I would encourage you to Google Dr. Erica Zelfin, Z as in zebra, E-L, F as in Frank, A-N-D. She has an excellent webinar talking about this very thing. And I will tell you, long story short, basically it's do no harm. If it's going to make the individual worse, withdrawal symptoms are a bitch. There's no question about that. If it's going to do more harm, then the point is to try and maybe leave them on the SSRIs and bump up the psilocybin. You've heard that there's a risk there. You're probably talking about serotonin syndrome. I would direct you to Dr. Ben Malcolm, spiritpharmacist.com, who does an excellent job talking about that and the fact that it's, well, quote unquote, there is not sufficient evidence for that. So Christina, please add to that.
There's nothing to add. You said it, that you did a really good synopsis there. MDMA and SSRIs absolutely do not work together.
Yeah.
So there is less, I don't think of it as a risk. The risk is that you're not going to feel the medicine because the SSRIs blunt the medicine. Serotonin syndrome is a thing. There's no question that it's a thing. But it's not as common of a thing as people think that it is. And exactly as you said, Chris, up the dose of the psilocybin. You don't get to up the dose with MDMA, though. We don't have as much room to work with dose changes and dose increases with MDMA. Increase the dose of psilocybin. Titrating off of SSRIs can be a very complex, challenging, difficult, painful process. So that needs to be done, certainly in consultation with somebody. I second the referral to the spirit pharmacist.
Okay. There's a couple of questions here that I don't feel anyone on this panel is qualified to answer. We're not MDs. Let's see. I'm not sure this question. What might be the best way to approach a hospice company with the idea of introducing cannabis and or ketamine for end of life? Good luck with that. But
well, I think it's about education, as everything is about education, informing people, giving them answers, referring them to the studies. I'll say that I had a meeting with my oncologist recently for my own cancer follow-up. And he said, so how do I get my patients to find out more about the work that you're doing? So that's part of how it starts, is information, education. Go in and do an in-service on this. Tell them about it. And, you know, what happened in the 60s around the whole drug craze thing and the drug scares, the studies that are being done now are really flying in the face of all of that. But education is a process. It takes time. But if people get exposed to the differences of what's happening now, which is why the studies need to be so stringent. Every I has to be dotted, every T has to be crossed. We have to have uniform process that's going on so that we can show those results. Then there's a whole other dimension that's mysterious that cannot be quantified or measured. But people who are working in hospice know about being in the time of mystery, know about sitting at the bedside. That's not a quantifiable experience. So find people who are working in hospice that have a little bit of interest and openness to this. I think it's changing. I really do. And I think we're at a time when we're going to see much more curiosity and interest in what we're doing.
And by the way, I found more interest in the states of Washington and Oregon. So if you happen to be out that way, that's better. Let's see, we're running out of time here. And let's see, if I could try to just answer a few more of these questions, and then we're going to have to cut it off and close off here. But an individual, and sorry to hear this, lost my boyfriend July of this year. Do you know any studies or clinical trials in Europe I could apply to? I would look at the Imperial College of London to see if there's any ongoing studies. I would look at Beckley Research. That's B as in boy, ECKLEY. That's located in Cambridge. There's work going on in Amsterdam, in Germany, in Switzerland. Actually, a website, clinicaltrials.gov, Gov, even though that's sort of a US website, it has clinical trials that also include Europe. So clinicaltrials.gov, and you can put in any keywords to try and find that. Question here, do you think psychedelics will become legal in Hawaii? Well, It probably will become legal in Hawaii once the FDA approves both MDMA and psilocybin. However, each state has to then reschedule it, but in all likelihood, it will. I know that Hawaii went through this set of legislative discussions, and they did something screwy where they said, yeah, we'll do it within 50 years. So it was a way for them to get this thing passed without making any sort of commitment. All right, we're not going to be able to get to the rest of them. Well, at least I want to say a couple more things here, and if we can answer, if anybody wants to stick around, if anybody's able to stick around, great. We want to make sure, okay, this seminar was free, courtesy of Psychedelics Today, but we would encourage you to, if you feel called, to donate to the End Well Project. This is a not-for-profit founded by Dr. Shoshana Ungerleider. This organization does phenomenal work, offering multiple resources and educational programs to help navigate this journey, whether you're the patient, whether you're the family member, any caregiver, a healthcare practitioner, or even an entrepreneur wanting to get into this space. So please, 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 if you feel called, this is a worthwhile organization to donate to. Well, that's, I guess I was going to ask everybody if they would like to leave everybody with a thought, one takeaway. So Catherine, I'll start with you.
Oh gosh, last thoughts. Thank you everybody for coming and for being part of this conversation. I would encourage you to take this information back to your loved ones. Let's normalize this conversation so that we can help people of all different kinds of backgrounds come to see death with less fear and more joy and peace. Thank you so much.
Christina.
Yeah, thank you all for coming and for your interest. I can just feel all the buzzing energy as Chris was going through the questions. So yeah, the end of life and working with psychedelic medicines is a potent, transformative, potentially amazing time for people. So these medicines can help us to remember who we are, to connect with all of what is, and face our mortality, recognize our connection to the all, open our hearts full of compassion and love, and nothing less, I believe, than the evolution of the individual, the collective, and working with these allies in service to all of us.
Excellent. Monica.
Just want to thank all these amazing women for the work that you're doing and helping everyone, quote unquote, make friends with death and find that peace while living. And everybody else who's here, who came in, this was a highest performing webinar I've experienced so far at Psychedelics Today. So everybody, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experiences, asking your questions and confiding in us. Hopefully we can do something else like this again, given the interest that we had here and all of the lingering questions that we have that unfortunately we couldn't answer. But thank you all so much for dropping in. It was such a delight.
Yeah, I'm sorry we can't get to these other questions. I did also want to mention that we will be sending out an email with the link to Psychedelics Today YouTube channel so that this will be recorded and you can access it through YouTube. And I would say, gosh, yeah, there's so much out there for research. There was a question here that could actually take another 90-minute webinar. How about people who have a personality disorder, bipolar, or schizophrenia diagnosis? I'd say if you don't know Benjamin Mudge, I would do research on Benjamin Mudge, who has done a lot of work as a PhD student on bipolar. Christina, if you could, I don't know if you could answer that question quickly, but that's a great question.
It's not fair to the question to really shortchange it in that way, but again, I would meet that individual where they are and consult with them and see what kind of work can be provided directly to them. Yeah, but we have to really meet each person's unique situation. This is not a cookie cutter recipe that across the board you can take this medicine no matter who you are. No, that's not the way this works. We really want to remember the mystery of what we're stepping into at the time of life that we're facing, when we're at that liminal space between life and death, which is the very same place that psychedelics access. So there's no easy recipe. There's no easy answers to these things. Let's meet the moment and let's be true to that and take the time that we need to really do this thoughtfully and intentionally.
Can I ask one more question? There's just one more, because this question comes up in this context a lot, and I think it's a great question. Has anyone had experience with psychedelics and medical aid in dying medications, perhaps psychedelics prior to ingesting MAID drug?
Yeah, I was on another presentation recently where I was asked this question, and it threw me a bit, and it really got me to be thinking about it. It got me to be thinking about Aldous Huxley, who decided to take psychedelics as he was dying, as did his wife. So yes, the aid in dying medication is a way that people are able to, in some states, in some countries, take medication to end their lives. And so the use of psychedelics along with those medicines, I think, is a really interesting exploration to consider. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, participants. This has been excellent. I just dropped my email into the chat. If you do have a question, and I'd be happy to try and answer it for you or direct you to who can answer that question for you. Otherwise, we're going to sign off, and thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you happen to be. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Well, bye.
Take care.